This episode of Forging Friendships is sponsored in part by Iron Mountain Metalcraft, located in the beautiful Pigeon Forge, Tennessee area. Go forge a memory with Forged in Fire fan favorite Robbie Bowman. Woo! The show is also sponsored in part by African Custom Knives, Black Dragon Forge, Paragon Kilns, and with the support of viewers like you through our GoFundMe campaign, link in description.
You know, I think it was the first time I was at a Renaissance fair. You know, the first time I ever went, I was fascinated by it. And I was just like, this is so cool. What a neat community. Like, how cool would it be to just, you know, make art and sell it and like live in a little hut and have fun. You know, it was a really neat thing to see. It seemed so much simpler than, like, you know, what I was doing, which was, you know, I was performing like 280 shows a year, you know, hustling, and it was great, and it was awesome to be able to perform that much, but it was exhausting. It's a lot of work. It's a lot of thankless work. You know, as a musician or an artist anywhere, people just assume what you do is like, oh, it's a nice hobby you have, and it's just like, I put more hours of work into my hobby than you do at your job or anything else you've ever done. You know, it's frustrating when people like kind of dismiss what you do because it's not what they consider a real job. It's just like anything that you work at, you honestly work at, you put your time and effort to pursue and to, you know, excel at is work. It's valid work, and it's important that people recognize that just for themselves. You know, music was getting pretty exhausting, and you know, working regular jobs at the same time. Like, you know, I started working when I was 12. I think I got my first job, and I think I had 2 jobs when I was 12. As a stock boy in one of my parents' friends' businesses. They ran a business selling schools, like supplies for teachers and things like that. It was a really neat little shop, educational tools. And then I worked as a dishwasher in my dad's friend's restaurant, and you know, that was like my introductory to the working world. And it was cool, and it was fun to be able to do that, and have that you know, to get that perspective of, like, you know, working hard and making money to be responsible. You know, and then I got a paper route, and I did that until I was like 16, 17. You know, and then got another, you know, series of regular real people jobs while also playing music at night. So, you know, you end up never sleeping. I don't think I slept regularly until I was in my mid-30s, which probably would explain a lot about my brain. But anyway, you know, I grew up in New York City on Staten Island. It's a terrible place. It's not a terrible place. There's lots of really awesome people there. I have mixed feelings about Staten Island. I often refer to it as a garbage dump in a mall, but and it's desperately lacking in culture sometimes. But there are awesome people there that have and bring so much culture to the place that, you know, it's just like, if only they got paid attention to more, it would be awesome. You know, it's hard to respect a place that doesn't have an actual, like, a legitimate coffee shop. I just can't, you know, can't respect a place like that. So there's that. But I grew up on Staten Island, and I was presented with an opportunity to apprentice and come to Texas to learn how to make blades and stuff like that, and I did that. And I moved down here, and I really liked Austin. I liked the pace of the city. It was a lot more relaxed than where I had come from. You know, being in New York City, it's just like you forget that sleep is a thing that you need. And here it was a little more relaxed. The pace was slower, and, you know, it was a more chill vibe. And it was easy to kind of like start wrapping my head around, like, some of the other, like, things in my past that were more damaging to my psyche than I'd like to admit. And it was a great place for me to heal and to learn new things and to learn how to be a more complete person. And so I stayed and I did my apprenticeship and, decided that it was a place that I didn't want to be anymore. I wanted to do things. I had a path that I wanted to follow that wasn't open to me there. And so I wanted to go off on my own and work more intimately with smithing and less production style work, more hands-on work. And so I left and I, went off on my own, and for a while there was a lot of floundering, sitting around trying to figure out, how do I do this? How do I make this work? And I had probably the first of really bad, chaotic times in my life where a lot of what I had fell apart, and I had a relationship fall apart that I thought was going to be like, one of those forever things, but because of head trauma, I received some bad concussions at the time that I didn't realize how bad they were. It led to a lot of complications in my life and letting people down. And so I lost a lot because I let people down, and I had to recover from that. And part of that recovery was I had a group of friends that were like, "You're a bladesmith, you make really cool knives and stuff, we've seen your work, we want to do a thing." And we started a little business to do this, and we started, what was ultimately my first shop. And unfortunately, being that I was crazy pants at the time, dealing with grief and post-concussion syndrome and crippling depression, it didn't work out so well, and because I didn't have a plan. I didn't have a plan of like, how am I going to make these things and sell these things, and it didn't work out, and I ended up letting more people down, and that business didn't quite turn out, and it fell apart, and I felt bad about it for a long time. But lucky for me, those friends were basically trying to help me deal with a really bad point in my life. So they were less worried about the business not working out and more concerned with, how do I come out of it, and which was the impetus I needed to make sure that I did the next version better, and that I made me better. And so, this work has basically been a journey of healing myself and becoming a better person, and trying hard to earn the opportunities that I've been given in my life, and to earn the friendships that I've made, and all the awesome people that I've encountered. Like, how do I earn those experiences, and and not just treat everything like oh well, I just walk into this and I deserve this because I'm me. You only deserve what you earned, in my opinion, and you earn these things by working and creating and whatever it is that you do. Try to do it well. Try to do it honestly, and make it worth the experience, and make the experience that other people have with you worthwhile. And so the second time I tried to create a business, I had more of a plan. I'm like, where am I going to sell these things, and and how do I start this more simply? And so I went from the first version of the first business I ever started, which we had a big shop, and we're trying to tool it up to be able to do this on a high level, and just trying to bite off too much, and I just wasn't ready for it. And so I started a lot more simply. I just kind of started with like a forge and a bunch of files, and I tied a tarp between two trees, and I just started to work, and made some blades, and I sold those blades, and I bought some more tools, and I sold some more blades, and I bought some lumber, and I built a little shack of a shop, and little by little building it up and putting tooling in it that I needed, and building up little by little. And it was not easy, but it was I think it was the progression that I skipped over in the beginning that I needed to kind of revisit and really experience, and that helped make me a complete maker and gave me a better idea of how this should be done, or how I should do it. Really, not there is no should be done. I don't believe in those kinds of stringent rules. There is a path for us, and we have to find the path that works best for us, that we navigate best and pushes us to our most potential. And so, yeah, I started a little smaller and slowly, and learn to take the skills that I had and really start expanding them and taking them somewhere, and getting better. And opportunities happened that helped kind of forge a path forward for the business and for what I'm doing. I met the first group of guys that helped me was, my friend Dallas and Meffy and Major. They were like family. They are family, and they're people I love deeply. And, they helped me pushing myself to be more than just, a guy who plays video games badly and, makes knives. I took what I learned from that experience, and I started my own company, and I kind of found some roots within my own name that I tied it to, and I started with these this little shanty in the back of the place that I lived, and I met a dude that wrote for Crack.com, Robert Evans, and he had found my card at a coffee shop and called me up, and he looked at my Etsy page and he saw one of the knives that I had just put up that he liked, and he called me, and like my business was very, very new, and I was working at night because we're in Texas, so I'd sleep pretty late into the day, and he calls me at the crack of like 10 a.m. I like sleepily answer the phone, and I'm like, hello, and he's like, is this Farrel Blades? And I'm like, yeah, who's this? Yeah, nobody calls me. Who knows who I am? And he's like, oh, I found your card here, and I saw this blade on your Etsy page. Is it available? And I'm like, yeah, it's available. And he's like, can I come look at it? I'm like, yeah, sure. And he like shows up, and it's like a house. And he's like, I was expecting a storefront. I'm like, oh, I don't have a storefront. I have a little shack in the back where I try and make knives. And I brought him in the back, and I showed him the knives, and I showed him the shop, and a little bit of what I did. And he's like, I'll be right back. And he comes back, and he just throws money on the table for the knife. And I'm like, well, that's awesome. Thanks. I can pay rent. And not be homeless. Yay. And we were talking about, what I do and what he does. And I asked him, what he did. And he's like, oh, I'm a writer. I'm like, oh, cool. Like what sort of writing do you use? Is it novels? Is it, reporting? And he's like, I write for Crack.com. And I was like, oh, that's so cool. I probably read some of your stories. Like, that's awesome. That's really cool. You're a reporter. And he's like, no, what you do is really cool. I'm like, no, what you do is really cool. And we have one of those, no, you're awesome. Nuh-uh, no, you're awesome. And he's like, you want to do a story with Cracked? And I'm like, what? I'm like, yeah, sure, man. I'm like, I don't know if I should really write a story, though, because I mostly point and grunt at things. So I don't know how that would translate into words. And he's like, well, I'll interview you. And I was like, well, that'll probably work, because you can do the wordy thing, and I'll just do the hit stuff with hammers thing. 6 things that movies get wrong about swords. It was pretty big. It got read by a lot of people. And I was introduced to the internet all at once, and there were many emails, and my social media exploded, and it was kind of interesting to get that kind of exposure all at once and not really be prepared for it at all. I think that's what kind of caught the attention of Forged in Fire, and had them. They called me and asked me if I wanted to do this thing. And it sounded like it was cool, and it'd be interesting and fun to experience. I like experiences. I like cool stuff, and they didn't give me much information at all. but it's a bladesmithing competition, and if you win, you'll win money. And I'm like, how much money? They're like, well, we can't really tell you that either. I'm like, what can you tell me? Will you kill me when I get there? Is this a trap? You know, like, you work for the government. It was kind of like right up my alley, because they're like, well, we can't really tell you what we're going to put you through, but it's not going to be easy, and it's something you've never done, which is really the important part. I'm like, oh, I've never done that before. That sounds like it's going to be completely insane. Maybe I'll do it. And I'm like, where do you film? And they're like, well, we might film in California, we might film in New York. And I'm like, well, if you film in New York, I'll do it. And I was like, I don't know if I'll do California. And they're like, why New York? I'm like, well, my family lives out there and I can't afford to go see them, so this would be a great way for me to get there for free. So basically I did Forged in Fire so that I could go visit my mom. And and see my family and go out there for a minute. You know how the Forged in Fire thing turned out. They invited me back for a Champions Edition, and well, that went the way it went. I was eliminated, probably for a non-reason, probably for the best reason I could expect to be eliminated for, really. My knife did good, and that's all I care about. And I had fun, and I got to see some of the guys from the show that I don't get to see a lot, and it was a blast. I never regret doing stuff like that. Anytime I get a chance to hang out with other makers and talk about what we're doing and see new work that we're doing, it's never time wasted. I've yet to have an experience with other makers and other guys from the show that has been wasted time. I never walk away not learning something. I think if you're walking away from situations like that and you're not learning, then you're doing something wrong. Where we're at now, in the world of COVID and mass hysteria, not that there's anything wrong with. I think COVID is definitely a problem, and it's highly infectious. It's luckily not as bad as we thought it was going to be, which is awesome. I understand these people who lose their minds over, see, it's not as bad, only X amount of people die. And it's like, if you're saying only X amount of people die, you really need to revisit your value system, because any number of people dying is a bad thing. And if we can prevent any of it, we might want to look into how we can lower that number. Always lower the number of people dying. If you're not focused on that part, you're doing life wrong. But it is, mass hysteria, mass disinformation. People don't know that multiple things can be true at the same time. We can have a highly infectious disease that isn't as bad as we expected it. We can be happy about that, and we can also be concerned with still trying to be careful. We can do all of these things at the same time without going, you were wrong, and therefore you should not be American anymore. And it's like, that doesn't even make any sense, people. Like, just stop being ugly. But anyway, so we're in the times of COVID now, and in this shop, I moved into this shop right after COVID started. So I was at a Renaissance fair. I was doing Sherwood, and I was applying to Sherwood for years. But they only allow a certain amount of a certain type of maker in the fair, because you don't want to oversaturate the environment, because then nobody makes any money. So I had to wait for them to have an opening, and they finally had an opening, and I got in, and it was like, yeah, I'm finally in this fair. So this year was going to be our second year there, and we started it, and hopefully we're going to build on what we built the year before, and maybe add another fair, and keep adding shows and kind of growing little by little, and at the end of Sherwood, we were going to move into this new place. And then Sherwood was closed because the world ended, however temporarily.
I like
Yeah. Yeah, the world is power cycling right now, and yeah. So Sherwood got canceled, and like 2 weeks in, and I didn't have a place to move to. The people at Sherwood being awesome, basically they left the camping portion, you know, of everyone that was working there. Anyone who had nowhere to go, we were able to stay for the duration that we were supposed to be there. As long as, you know, we were all careful and we observed quarantine rules and stuff like that. And, you know, it was great. So I was like in an abandoned Renaissance fair for like a couple of months, living in my tent and making knives because all my stuff was already set up. So I just stayed there. I made knives and you know, hoped that I would find a way to move into the new place and maintain it. You know, and, with all the shows being canceled this year, I was just like, I don't know how I'm going to make any money because I don't have any events to sell at. So I took to, you know, doing social media and doing more online work, and luckily we've been able to kind of maintain some semblance of sales and keep, you know, keep moving, keep alive. Hasn't been easy, but it hasn't been bad either, and that's awesome. I mean, we have basically been presented with the most convenient apocalypse ever, and anyone who's complaining right now, it should really kind of like take a look around. You know, this could have been so bad. It could have been so bad, and I'm not saying it's awesome, but as far as like apocalypses go, as far as like, you know, global pandemic, global thing that happens, we have been presented with an opportunity to navigate through this fairly simply. You know, there are difficulties, it's hard, there are massive complications and things that are affecting the entire world, but it has happened in a way that we have the opportunity to navigate it, and we can either get ugly about it and spoiled and bitter, or we can take this freedom of movement that we have within it and grow and kind of get through it and support each other and become better. You know, it's like, well, what do you want to do? You want to be a bitter, angry person that wants to destroy everything you disagree with? Or do you want to, you know, navigate through this difficult time, support, you know, the people around you that you can, and build something better out of it? You know, what do you want to do? You know, it's like, I know what my answer is. And that's what I'm trying to do with this new shop is, you know, get a little bit bigger and do more work and be able to, you know, produce more. And I've got some great apprentices with me now, my buddy Bo and David, that have helped me so much, and they kind of help contain the bag of cats that is my brain. And they're basically part of my plan to make myself completely irrelevant, because when I'm done with them, they're gonna be way better than I am, and then I can just, I don't know, be able to sit in a chair and be an old grumpy bastard while they do really awesome stuff and just point at the, I don't know, I'll probably be senile by then, so, you know. Yeah, there's that guy who was on that TV show, and he just sits there and murmurs to himself. It's really not much different than now, actually. It's pretty much what I do now.